Well, it's really great to be back in Santa Barbara for sure, especially with my homies coming barreling down here all together in our little place capsule, really. Telling stories, organizing, laughing, having bizarre joke sessions late into the night, which I will not repeat. But it's great to be back here because I used to come back a lot more, but it's been a little while. But there are, for me personally, many dear ones, and I know that you're all dear ones to each other and to other people who aren't here. So it's wonderful to be part of such an excellent, beautiful fabric, and also to come into the place of power of the Culture of Lucidity Festival. And we've been looking forward to, we've been working with cities, lots of other cities, to help them do things that they want to do for a long time. But this is the first time that a major organization who's used to doing village making, village building in an ephemeral way has turned its focus onto the state of the urban environment. And this is super powerful stuff. So we're really excited to be a partner in this. So I want to just be sure to emphasize that we're not here to try to colonize anybody. We're definitely here at someone's invitation. In fact, we're interested in decolonizing, and that's the common cause of not just the 21st century, but all the way back to the start of colonialism, which has been washing like this horrific wave of forgetting and violence over the whole planet. It's actually a cause that unifies us all. It unifies the oppressor and the oppressed, in fact, because it turns out that we all have roots in village somewhere before we ourselves were conquered and made to forget, made to work for somebody else's vision. And that's where we find ourselves now. And I think in Portland we're very aware of it. Like we know that we're in a colonial infrastructure that was laid out on paper in the same moment as Santa Barbara. We know that it's because of the National Land Ordinance of 1785 that all of the cities, especially west of the Ohio River, are laid out using the Roman colonial grid. And they are laid out as imposed infrastructures that basically proscribe how the economy and the political structure and even the geographic structure will be laid out from a central place with with the Continental Congress basically formulating the plan. I know a lot about this because not only have I been studying it for years, but this last summer, after getting married, I went to visit my relatives in Marietta, Ohio, which is kind of very famous as the first colonial town to use the Roman colonial grid. And I went into the old museum there to find out more about the story of my ancestors' hometown. And there in the founding signatures of the first colonial infrastructure imposed over Native people were the names of my own family. So that's bizarre, because I have a problem with that whole story. And I think that must mean that I must be a good person because I'm interested in looking into the mirror and like looking beyond what I see in a reflection. I want to know the whole story. I want to know the very roots of the issue, and that's why we're here tonight. We want to know the roots of the whole issue, and we don't just want to talk about it. I'm sure you and your friends might sit around a lot talking about issues. For myself, I couldn't stand it anymore. There was a day when I was sitting around with my friends yet again, having coffee till late in the morning. We were a bunch of slacktivists or yaktivists, you might call us, just kind of sitting around talking about problems and just thinking, well, those are beyond our reach, even though we're white and privileged and have educations and lots of access to power. We're too damn lazy to even think for half an hour of what we could do about it. So something happened that morning, and there was some decision by a few of us that we were all lame, and I, for myself and Pedro, didn't want to see our friends again if we couldn't at least take a half an hour to talk about the issue. And after half an hour, we actually found that we had a plan. We actually thought about it for a moment, like, what could we do through local action to affect systemic change? And because of our university educations, it was like, oh yeah, we're living in a massive infrastructure that's so pervasive that anything that anybody does anywhere to address the issues and create solutions to isolation and disempowerment and the abject lack of grassroots democracy and the abject unsustainability of so many of our patterns. Like anybody anywhere who does anything worth talking about can inspire everybody all over the landscape of that same system. So we're like, oh my God, we have no excuse not to do something. Like almost anything you try out can have an impact that's greater than what you would even experience in your own life if you just tell the story and share pictures or something. So we got going. But that's part of why we're here, because the stories we've been pumping out of self-empowerment and utter urban transformation are of interest everywhere, because we are suffering so many of the same issues and watching this pace of social disintegration systematically happening around us. Does any of us feel insulated from it, like it won't affect us? We're all part of this. We're all seeing it happen, and it's affecting us even on a level of just getting up in the morning feeling racked with anxiety, which I'm so tired of. If I have a personal goal in my life, it is to wake up one day not feeling anxious anymore, like, okay, whew, all right, we're somehow back to a normal equilibrium of drama and human problems that are manageable and that we can own and be responsible for, and not stuff that seems ever beyond us, a tremendous scale of injustice or avarice or sort of venal behavior, craven behavior on behalf of leaders who aren't really leaders. So the things we're going to talk about tonight apply to you, because there's stories of people saying, oh my God, I realized I live in a development. I keep thinking I live in a village, but I live in a development, which means there's no gathering places or anywhere for anyone to talk. And not only is there not place, there's not a culture of power that has the ability to affect every issue where I live. And that's true of every small town, every big city, all across the country, because it was laid out in the same moment by the same document. So let's move on, though. I just got off the plane coming from doing a lot of really good work in Japan, and jumped in the car with my friends to get on the road. So I'm in culture shock and really tired at the same time, and now in Santa Barbara. Well, here we were having this national picnic. I don't know if you heard of this, but they have this thing called the Moon Day Picnic. On the harvest moon, every year when the moon is full, everyone is out having a picnic with their families, sitting by thousands of people on this vast landscape, way bigger than this picture depicts, sitting on the grounds of this huge Shinto temple complex, just having a picnic, just be looking at the moon, just like, damn, that moon, that keeps coming back. Every single year, harvest moon, just glowing at us like that. Amazing. So they're just sitting there witnessing the moon and playing musical instruments and little puppet shows going on around the perimeter, and these little altars that they've set up to the moon all through the landscape that are just kind of glowing luminous with candlelight. And I was blown away, because city repair started with a tea house that had a Shinto gate, and it was called the Moon Day Tea House, bringing people together every Moon Day night. That's Monday, or lunes in Spanish, which of course refers to the moon. So I was like, how in the world did we get started with this similar set of themes and threads, not even really understanding it? And then I was there to witness it. When we first built that Moon Day Tea House, the idea was to model every single dimension of sustainability that we could and somehow grow a transformed culture out of it. And like, why not dream so huge? I mean, we watch movies all the time about like James Bond saving the world with 0.07 of a second left or something like that. Like we seem to be thrilled by challenges that are impossible. So rather than just having somebody else be a scriptwriter and a producer to bring us such stories, why don't we acknowledge the fact that we like drama? Apparently we do, because here we are. The world is on a precipice or something like that. You couldn't ask for a juicier story, especially one whose success, like in the end, ultimately, really, well, there won't be an end if we're successful. But this chapter depends on the entire world coming together in some way, on their local terms, in a way that adds up to a total effect of a better world. I think we're close. I think we're very close. It's just that the initial sort of phase of big transformation might be the hardest. And as I can tell you about Portland, for us, the earliest stages where we really just buckled down, that was the hard stuff. Now we're cruising. We're cruising. We're naked in the streets by the thousands on bicycles, celebrating like mad. I should just keep going here. Okay. It does not help anything to wake up and find ourselves in an infrastructure that somebody else has designed, in which we have been seen as a workforce that just gets up in the morning, leaves the home zone to go to the work zone. We don't even realize that we've been utterly tricked to work like 35 years to pay for a house. Like going back, we have such an absurd situation. We talk about a zero energy house these days without daring to account for all the carbon emissions that are expanded as you leave the house to go to a job, coming back and forth, having this massive impact just in terms of transportation, not to speak of what you're doing in your job. No, that's not a zero energy house. Let's talk about a Chumash house. We're going to talk about zero energy. How about a house that you can build in a few days with your friends? Maybe every 6 months or every year, you fix up the house, but you don't have to work 35 years just to pay for it. Like, that's a sustainable culture, one that liberates your time so that you can be present with your family, mentor your own child. And our society doesn't just create so-called zero energy house paradoxes that are just like so obscenely inefficient, no matter how much you weather strip them and no matter how passive solar it might be. The design of the whole kit, the whole package that we're living in, takes us away from our children by design, and we actually functionally create the generation gap by forcing our parents to leave their children in order to go earn a livelihood. And only at the end of the day, if we have enough money, we come back home and try to have a little bit of quality time. There wasn't a single mother of any kid all across this country who ever said, oh, this is awesome. I'd totally sign up for that reality, one in which our buying power diminishes every day, and the cost of everything inflates every day. Like, this isn't predicated on a democratic principle that things should somehow be disintegrating qualitatively and quantitatively around us. And yet, this is the reality we live in. Some colonizers move into a watershed, carve it up irrespective of its natural systems, patterns, and cycles, and start to, enact this extractive reality that just becomes more and more unsustainable with every season. So, okay, there was this brilliant young woman named Lizzie Maggie at the beginning of the last century who invented the game Monopoly to try to help us understand what's happening to us. And that was a long time ago. Parker Brothers picked up the game and turned it into this, but it was originally called the Landlord's Game, or the game of Dominus, the patterns of domination and colonialism. So as you go around this game, you know how it works. Hopefully you notice within a couple of cycles that the only form of commons is a jail and a parking lot, and that you're actually buying and selling your reality as a commodity. Like, this is how the National Land Ordinance of 1785 is laid out. It actually proscribes that our reality will work like this, and we'll have to work our whole lives just to pay for our life. And meanwhile, that transfers wealth and power to other people that we'll never even meet, who actually designed the game and tricked us into it. So no wonder we find ourselves in landscapes where somebody says, because, neighborhoods are laid out by developers, not villagers. We save money to travel across the oceans to go visit a place where people create their own reality through participatory culture, where they don't just sort of inhabit the landscape of stories all around them, but they're wearing it on their costumes, they're speaking in their language and all the metaphors that they use and all the artistic expression. And this is worth talking about. Like, I've heard people say, oh, not for me, I'm not wearing clogs, no thank you. Like as if villager is this sort of dowdy old, notion that is antiquated. No, we're talking about the places with the highest public health statistics in the world and the lowest crime rates of all, and the most participatory cultures characterized by the most gathering places that you can find. And that's why we travel to see them. In fact, some people just don't even want to get on the plane and come home. It's like, no, don't make me, But then you come home again and you save money in order to vacate or go on vacation, to go to another place that might have a sense of meaning and beauty that's just kind of taken for granted by everyone. So here we are in these normative patterns where developers make our physical reality. And they're like, well, people don't talk to each other anymore. Who needs a porch? Let's just make it all about the cars now, and that's what they sell us, and that's what we consume, because we need a roof over our head, and maybe that's the only affordable choice. And then this idea that the vital guts of community that used to be Main Street in small towns suddenly gets moved away from where you live to these centralized boxes that you must travel to. by car. Like, we didn't choose to make that sort of huge infrastructural shift to these kinds of boxes where somebody else can decide when the space is closed. They offer you the European street, experience of this nicely defined walking avenue, which is animated by beautiful textures and colors along the edge. Yeah, you'll go there because that's that's like saying to a bird, yeah, there's a nest over here, your habitat. We go there to see other people and be part of this movement and this swirling tide that moves around in the space. But then somebody says, oh, it's closing time. And if you even try to gather signatures or do public speaking, they'll kick you out because it's not the village. It's like saying, first we privatized land, now we're getting around to privatizing water and air and genetics. Well, the whole idea of the village heart and the fabric, the guts of the village body was long ago privatized and removed from where we live. So we barely even talk to each other. That's what happens when you disintegrate living and working. They used to be integral, so that work wasn't really work, it was more like play. And living was characterized by relational networks that got stronger every day, and not just sort of coming home tired, maybe having a little bit more money. It's not enough. Okay, so at the same time, we notice that on a professional scale, developers are saying, oh, you want walkable and talkable. Okay, apparently that's what's selling these days, as people want a greater sense of place. It's nice to have a place to sit, but these sorts of places are really only affordable to people who have a lot of money. And what about the places where the millions of people across the country already live? The fact is, an architect and a developer, a banker decided to create this, but it has no story. It has no story, it has no imprint of the hand. And ultimately, it isn't sustainable because it's going to be made out of really cheap stuff, because the idea is to make a lot out of what you put very little into. And nature doesn't act that way. And if we don't act like nature, we're not going to be here very long, as we already profoundly understand. So thank you very much for the nice walkable, talkable neighborhood. But people don't tend to talk as much here because there isn't a sense of story, therefore not identity, and therefore not affinity, and therefore we won't talk. Okay, but it wasn't always this way. The next few pictures are from my mom. She's kind of this grandmother version of Indiana Jones, actually. And she's super incredibly tough. So here she is down at the bottom of a well, and she's looking up at the surface when she took this picture. And she took me to this place, and she said, all right, there was a time when we had such a strong mutual culture. In this case, in Umbria, they knew that an extended drought would persist for many years. Somehow the people must persist. So they said, we will go down through this rock as far as we need to get to water. And many of us will die because we're just going to be using rock to get to rock. They didn't even have, the resilient implements that we have at this time. So some of them died going down through this to get to water, and then build this double helix ramp system where donkeys come down one way with bags that can contain water, and then other donkeys go up the other way, like this, to take water up to the surface. And they were like, our people will endure. Like, they cared about each other so much, they cared about people who didn't even exist yet. And they honored the stories that they still knew of the people who weren't with them anymore, because they knew they were part of a continuity. That's how rich their life was. And so this is a water commons. This is an investment commons. It shows how much they understood that they were interconnected and part of a greater whole. And as you travel around the island of Sardinia, where my mom is now, you find that there are still 6,000 of these astounding megalithic villages, multiple towers of stone reaching up for the sky, with also helix stairways inside of them. Each one of them with this passive solar courtyard, like a great belly aimed at the south. All of them aimed at the south, passive solar courtyards. And these courtyards are where all of the entrances of the pathways to the rest of the infrastructure of the village, they all converge there. So what we're seeing here are these crystallization of urban patterns. We're actually seeing proto-urban structures. And when I was here walking around, I was totally inspired. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. We had this worked out like 4,000 years ago, the balance between private and public interest. But then I was really pissed off too and cried, because I'm like, here we are having to talk about this in the 21st century and try to remember how things used to be. Why aren't we building on the successes of the past? So this is why it's important to talk about cultural disruption and colonialism, Because if that's happening, then nothing remains sustainable. No, if you break continuity of memory and story, then no one can endure. Fortunately, though, you can go here because the Romans never got around to destroying it like they did almost everywhere else that they went. They wanted to destroy even the evidence of alternative cultures. But they didn't do it on Sardinia because it's so close to Rome. They didn't want to build any city-states there. They just wanted to use it as a farm so that they could grow food there to feed Rome. So by a paradox of history, you can go to Sardinia now and find the evidence of gigantic, tremendous so-called pagan cultures. Pagan meaning everybody else but Rome. Sort of a slur at the time. So those are the sort of patterns. Actually, let's go back. See this village? Like, it's celebrating the cosmology that was evident in front of them, that everything is circular and spherical about our reality. And so they're worshiping that in the way that they designed their very architecture of place, especially their great meeting house. In the center of the meeting house was this great chalice of water. They would actually sit around just going, water, damn, water. It's great, amazing, and that would help. So here we are in a medieval village here that was directly inspirational to create with this great public square here called the Piazza del Campo, which inspired Portland, Oregon, to create our great village square. The reason we had to create it was because the National Land Ordinance that mandated the Roman grid was the first time in the history of the planet Earth that a document that mandated how colonialism would proceed excluded gathering places. Portland, Oregon's public square is about 25 years old because we had to put one there. After 150 years, we suddenly woke up and were like, oh my God, we don't have one single social space that's non-commercial. And that was a fight to put it back. Anyway, we were inspired by other places, and we put this thing back, and it has had this tremendous ongoing ripple effect all across the region to transform everybody, to finally have a space or a place where time and space is not for sale, and everybody knows symbolically and functionally that they have a part of it, that they belong there, is an enormous sort of help to a consciousness shift. So this idea is why we travel to other places. Now the dream for Portland, Oregon, because we are standing on the shoulders now of previous generations of people who just would not give up. Now we have this relentlessly joyous activist culture, which is way beyond the tipping point of what we need anymore to affect the transformation. And more people are coming, which is a little bit of a problem, but most all of them are tremendous people, and they just want to be a part of it and help. So here's a picture of a transformed Portland, and almost everything that you can conceive of about how you would love to live, in this case in an very urban environment, is depicted. Of course, the buildings are transformed and retrofitted. Of course, there's urban agriculture everywhere. Of course, there are people flooding the streets because we want to talk. I mean, if we're going to be a socially just culture, then we need to have cultural fusion happening all the time. So it's not just people out there dancing and talking. There's puppet shows, there's musical performances, people just moving through the space with their vegetables, going back to feed their family. But the streets are flooded with culture, and the cars are gone because we've localized our power and our networks, and more. But how does this happen? I mean, a lot of people would say, well, gosh, I mean, that's great for Portland, but how are we going to do it where we live? Fortunately, we have the inspiration of permaculture, which reminds us all you need to do is start. Start wherever you are with whatever you have. In fact, when we got started, we said, okay, this day sitting around having coffee, we're like, okay, we know that the revolution we seek is one where people have to be able to act with what they have, where they are right now. And that would be, I think, the same story for anyone, anywhere. So here are these people standing in this intersection going, oh my God, there's no public gathering place here. And yet, for the thousands of years before cars existed and now that dominate this space, the principle of every village in the world was that where our pathways come together, our lives converge, and you honor that with the village heart. So they're like, there's no village heart here, what a trick. A little while later, it looks like this. And what in the world does that do to spark or jumpstart your heart, your sense of possibility? It does everything, because to create this, it depends on the people who live all around here, talking to each other, sharing food. Oh, you live there, you live here. Our children go to school here, you work over here. Like, you're starting to reweave story, and then together you decide what you're going to do, and then there's an artist in the community and someone who can draw, and everybody comes out with their musical instruments, and the children are suddenly there, and You're mentoring them automatically in the civic space where they learn that essential thing that they're part of a greater whole early in their life, and bam, you're underway. Maybe the hardest thing has just happened. Actually, that is the hardest thing. Helping us to remember that nobody else can possibly have our power, only us, is maybe the biggest challenge, just to shift that understanding. In this neighborhood in Portland, they learned that bee populations are distressed across the planet, so they're like, all right then, fine. We'll go out Saturday morning before we even have breakfast, and we'll plant pollinating beneficial plants on 22 houses on this block and on every house face all around the block, before we even have breakfast. And that's really important stuff, but it's also important to help Carl here, who can't even get out of his wheelchair, to do that. So, we're through a social lens, we're applying permaculture, and we're saying, how many functions can we stack? We've got elders who need help, who need support, who want to have things happen, and yet they can't even help themselves. So we need to fan out and figure out where they are. And then once you create that sort of benefit for him, then all these other things start to happen once he feels like you care. So endless possibilities. So yeah, mason bee habitat here, a little poetry dispenser over here, and on and on. And then later on in the afternoon, after lunch, we're out in our outdoor kitchen here making pesticide full zone signs, very sad, because we're killing insects. These are little guerrilla signs where people are going out on bike paths and along streets where the municipality's been spraying with insecticide, and we're just authorizing ourselves to make little signs to call out the problem. And of course some of these might be taken up, but that's part of what happens. You just do it. Like Shakespeare said, just start. You don't even need to know where you're going, just start walking, Okay. Well, of course, every little thing that we do ends up adding up to a larger network. Like, for instance, here in Vancouver, BC, where the city council and the mayor office has been taken over by the most incredible political culture I have ever seen, the strongest mayor of all time. Lisa Helps is her name. And I was there for a series of workshops talking about placemaking and building tiny home villages with homeless people. And she stands in front of everyone and she says to the police and the fire department and all the staff that's there and the community, because they've packed the house, and she's like, this isn't a question of if. Like, everybody's just like, oh my God, we have a strong leader who knows what she's doing, finally. The police are like, absolutely, Mayor. So she's like, we are going to be installing 6 intersection interventions that are created by participatory cultures. We're building 3 homeless villages. We've got $1 million for that. And she's like to the police, tomorrow morning, I want on my desk how you're helping. There's not a question about this. I want to know what you're going to do to make this happen. And they're like, absolutely, ma'am. So then we're out riding critical mass style through the streets with thousands of people from Victoria following their city council. Spontaneous, there's no permit for this. And the city council folks just get on the phone, they're like to the police, okay, we need a blockage right over here in about 35 seconds. The police show up, stop traffic, and everyone's just flowing through, and the police are totally smiling. They're finally part of some true vision and real leadership. So yeah, they're going to be installing food forests, major ones, all over town, and then connecting them with edible pollinator pathways. And that's not an finished image. This is to get started as they revegetate and rewild the city. Of course, where we come from and the places we love to see and to go visit and dwell in for a while are characterized by networks of place. So here's Venice, Italy, one of people's, everyone's sort of favorite places to go. And you can see major gathering places are kind of everywhere in this population of less people than in, maybe even a Santa Barbara neighborhood. But they have dozens of major gathering places and hundreds of smaller ones and multiple times less crime and a higher quality of life in many respects. So the network, though, isn't just open spaces, it's cultures of people that steward that space and talk to each other and interact because they're nested around that node. So that's what we're talking about. It's not just restoring a gathering place, it's the culture of stewardship around it that will want to be there. They say about Americans, we move every 4 to 7 years because we're always ending up dissatisfied and then we try to go somewhere else that might be better. these people don't move. And that's what's happening in Portland, Oregon too. Around the nodes where we've done these retroactive installations, people don't move anymore. And they become measurably healthier physically and mentally as a result. No wonder. We're restoring something which was always supposed to be part of our reality. And after all, let's do remember that before cars even existed, for thousands and thousands of years, the spaces between our homes brought us together. And since the advent of the car, the space is dominated. And this is something to feel really pissed off about. Take that pissed offedness and turn it, though, into determination, creative, just joyous license to get out there and do what you will. Because nobody ever got to talk about the idea that streets would just be for cars now. In fact, in 1900, 50 people a year died in the streets of the United States because a donkey stepped on them or something like that. By 1920, it was 30,000 people. And at that point, Kansas City and Cincinnati both tried to pass ordinances to mechanically limit the speed of cars to only 25 miles an hour. And at that point, the car companies and the oil companies heard about these initiatives, and they totally slammed them down, flooding the election process with money, which of course is what they do. So they defeated these measures, and then they got the president and the Congress to collude to make it now the law of the land that streets were for cars and no longer for people. In fact, that's when the crime of jaywalking was created. A jay was a person from the country who walked according to topography, or as the crow flies. So a person who wouldn't walk long, straight, flat lines and only turn 90-degree corners was suddenly a criminal. And no family ever got to weigh in on this. Like, what are the social consequences of losing millions and millions and millions of square meters of public space across the country and having no public squares anywhere? What did it cost us? I mean, you already know in the neighborhood where you live, you might know the people's names around you, maybe a potluck, maybe a block party, but barely. And that's not how it's supposed to be. We've been robbed. We have been robbed. And our disempowerment and the thriving of corporate culture and the way that they dominate the political discourse is predicated on that disempowerment and our alienation from each other. So what we're talking about tonight is urban permaculture, it's placemaking, it's revillaging, it's reclaiming the commons. It's a lot of them. It's certainly transition initiatives. But there are many, many different threads that are all woven together, and you address them all when you come together with the people where you live to undertake initiatives, especially ones where your kids are involved. You stack so many dysfunctions and address them with a healing impulse of creativity. I say we ache for this. The idea that in our midst there will be people sitting there looking into the eyes of their grandchildren, teaching them songs and stories. That's a sustainable, resilient culture. If a grandmother can look into the eyes of her granddaughter and know that the stories and the songs have been heard, then we will persist. And if that doesn't happen, we will fail. We ache for this. There are songs. Travel around the world and ask them their songs, the villages where you go. I had one young man in Italy sing me a song which was to say, if you wake up in the morning and you don't hear people out in the piazza, something's gone wrong again. And that's a reminder about the Nazi occupation of their hill towns in World War II, like something was wrong again. So they have these songs and stories to remind them, but also they have these essential building codes, like another song that says, just remember that between where every grandmother lives and where she goes to get her bread, there must be at least 3 places for her to sit with her friends, because otherwise she won't have a place to rest as she carries the groceries home to feed the family. And otherwise she won't be able to sit and share stories with her peers and friends. And otherwise the continuity of the society will be missing and everything will go wrong again. Those are building codes. In our country, a building code is like, how thick you make a railing. It's all about the material stuff. Who cares about this stuff compared to this? This is the only stuff that stands a chance of lasting. But in our country, we are now, apparently, many of us, not all of us, so alienated from each other that you can have a community workshop. I guarantee you, this will happen in Santa Barbara. If you talk with your neighbors, people will be like, oh no, you're going to put in a bench, you fools, don't you realize someone will sit there? They'll actually be afraid of sociability, and they won't even care about the symbolic power of something that says, here's a place for you, like not important anymore. Okay, so, a lot of benches are just kind of located there by a planner or a transportation official as a way for you to rest as you're getting a bus to the next place, but not in our neighborhoods. Maybe in a park. Okay, but by God, what are benches for? I mean, there have been political movements inspired by benches, but benches are for just being there, for being public space actually becomes more dangerous if you don't occupy it with people just sitting there talking. But the puritanical attitude of the United States toward work was that we must be working all the time and not even sitting and talking ever. There's a lot that we've been fighting over just to even have a sense of community. But I think one of the greatest things, maybe the bottom line for a sustainable culture, is that by God, everywhere where a mother needs to rest to nurse a child, she must have a place to sit. I think that's the bottom line. And just stop to consider that there are mothers here who have been in a similar plight. There are our own mothers. We're looking for a place to sit, and this has happened to us all, even as babies, but we were too young to remember it. In fact, some of them just sit on a curb, or some of them have to go into a toilet stall in order to have a place to sit. And this is so completely wrong and unjust. It's really like we're over an edge when this is how bad it can get. Are we surprised when we understand this issue that all these other challenges face us? Again, though, it's only us that can do anything about it. There's no budget big enough. There's no president smart enough. We are like the intelligence and creativity of generations through time, locked behind a dam in our own imagination. Okay, but not so much in Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon is so awesome that when you get on a plane like this in Cleveland, Ohio, just going to Portland, most of the people on the plane are from Portland and they know it. So you walk on, you can notice that they're talking to each other before the plane hasn't started yet, and they're exchanging cards and stories. So I got to my seat, and I'm just about to sit down, and this young woman sees me coming. She picks up my seatbelt, and she lifts it up, and she says, "Let me make it easier for you." And I sit down, and then she lays it across my lap. And we're talking, and the guy on the other side of her says, "Would you like some gum?" Offers me some gum. I'm like, "No thanks, I don't chew." And then somebody behind us, I swear to you this happened, passes over the back of the chair a plate of cookies. Not just out of a box, these were baked. And there was a sign that said, "Welcome home." And we looked at each other because that hadn't happened to me before. So we took a cookie and we passed them over the seat, and they're plate of cookies going, and then another one came. And then another one came. And I was thinking to myself, American Airlines has probably not figured out a way to stop this yet. On flights to Portland, no more cookies. Thank you. Okay, so you're just there, and you'll be seeing lots of bicyclists, probably being like, "Damn, there's a lot of trees here." Because we get out and plant trees, lots of gardens, lots of evidence of love and creativity, like porches, of course, with prayer flags and beautifully tended gardens and exuberantly painted houses and all that sort of stuff. But then there's these crazy kid lemonade stands and bake sales, which aren't just any old lemonade stand. These are to save sea turtles. I'm riding along on a bike trying to get up this really steep hill. I'm late for a meeting, and I see these kids. I'm just like, okay, let's screen them out, because they're gonna be doing something. So I get up this speed, and they call out, "We're doing a sustainable lemonade sale." I was like, "I know, but I gotta go to a meeting." She's like, "Well, we're saving distressed creatures in the Gulf and helping children from this other place." And I'm like, "Oh, God." So I go over there, and they got all these different packages you can get with different sized drinks and combinations of baked goods. Yes, that's how it is. So Portland, Oregon is just shaking stuff out of its sleeve, suddenly the world's leading facility for taking just smashed computers and recycling them and rebuilding them. In fact, this is a totally social justice organization, focused organization called Free Geek. And what they do is they rebuild computers, and if you just help for 8 hours, you get a free computer. You can't even buy a computer. Oh, you're rich? Sorry, you have to volunteer for 8 hours. So everyone who volunteers for 8 hours gets a computer, and they're like, "God, these people are awesome geeks." And so their volunteer culture just grows. So this is what we do in Portland. We instead of using the community to do stuff in order for somebody to disproportionately benefit, we use stuff as a means to build community, which is kind of like the human being way, after all. So Narendra Varma, one of the founding employees of Microsoft, came to Portland, he's like, I can't even believe it. This is the place of my dreams. Now I know what to do with my millions and millions and millions of dollars. So he started off, his first agriculture initiative is in Southwest Portland. It's called Our Table, ourtable.org. And it's this incredible initiative. I mean, it's incredible because it's organic and it's regenerative and it's focused on soil fertility, and most of its systems are perennial, so you minimize the carbon output while you maximize the fruitfulness. No blueberry even leaves the realm of Portland, Oregon, so it's absolutely focused on localization. But that's not even amazing compared to the fact of its organizational diagram, which you should look into, which basically folds everybody into a social ecology who helps to guide and run and manage the farm, and everybody who benefits and eats the food all have a voice in how it runs, and everybody helps. Amazing. So building community through how we used to do stuff, but in a new way. Here's the design offices of City Repair, and we've wrapped our little place with an urban food forest installation, 6 vertical layers of productivity, including even almonds and peaches, because we're growing in a little microclimate here, so we can actually grow stuff out of our zone, while we're also shading our vast storefront windows and the urban environment hardscape there. So actually fighting the urban island effect while we passively cool and heat our building, while we also provide habitat for mammals and birds and insects and food for ourselves. This is one of our design projects, the rebuilding center of Our United Villages, which again is like, how do we build community? That's our question. Like, aside from the thing that someone might want to make, what we bring to it is, how are we going to build community through this? So this building is cool because it has the highest content of recycled and natural material of all architecture in the USA. That's cool. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that are wonderful about it, giant bioswales and all this water catchment, but the coolest thing is that nobody comes from beyond walking distance, so there's no carbon impact through commuting. Everyone who works here has power in the way that the organization runs collaboratively. Everyone has full health and dental benefits and a living wage, and the benefits cover their entire families. And, strangely, everything here that you get, which is basically stuff that's taken out of the waste stream, like old 2x4s and toilets and doors, all the stuff in there costs pennies on the dollar compared to Home Depot and Lowe's, and yet everyone is paid way more. And that's because there isn't this extractive corporate sort of vampire involved in the design of the organization. They run it for the benefit of the whole community, and it is so fruitful that every organization in the city can come at least twice a year and take as many building materials away for their projects as they can for free. Whoa, like how do you even do that in corporate capitalist America? There's something about a truer economy, as Native people would say, based on the economy of the universe, where you invite abundance instead of just taking. Okay, here's a really great one. This is inspired by Cesar Chavez. This is the organization Picun creating a training facility called Capaces, the Capaces Institute. It's the most energy efficient office building in the United States, and it would be super expensive if not for the fact that their vision was to build community from the start. So to teach kids, how to dig a hole, how to lift something heavy together, how to get on the roof and plant the soil on the living roof. So in the end, a $600,000 building ended up costing about $200,000 because of all of the community involvement and sharing and giving. Okay, so now here's 2 huge things that we're addressing in Portland. One is we're retrofitting the urban environment in order to transform it utterly. So with this guiding principle, and this is from our sage urban planner, the beloved Carl Abbott, the great storyteller of Portland. In the broadest sense, the goal of urban planning is to facilitate communication. The environments where we live are supposed to facilitate our interaction and communication, because then we have a democracy. Because the demos is a place-based group of people who create together. That's the idea that we're supposed to be predicated on. And in Portland, we're addressing climate change because we're creating all these nodes of localization and creative empowerment that are inherently problem-solving oriented. So in 2009, climate scientists said, oh my gosh, here we are at 100% emissions and increasing. We need to get to here as a planet to reduce by, at the time they said 90%, and then Americans at 22% of the impact and only 5% of the population. We need to come down to 2% of what we're presently doing. Otherwise, we're going to destabilize the systems of the planet that our lives depend on. So here's this incredible design constraint, and it's interesting that during the recession we dipped by almost 10% emissions, while people, interestingly, became more healthy as a result of having more time and stuff. But we're certainly, here we are about 2015, and we're not here. We're more like here again. But there's a lot of pieces to think about here. But this is what we're focused on. This is actually a design constraint that we think is not so much terrifying as it's like the ultimate thing that we needed the whole time to help us realize that we're in a whole system and we are depending on each other to act. Okay, so looking at the system of Portland, which is so similar to Santa Barbara or Los Angeles or New York, here's where a person lives who then has to go long distances just to do their work. And then they come home at the end of the day, maybe pick up their child, they run to the doctor, they go around doing some stuff at retail outlets, and they're having this enormous impact on the infrastructure. That's all happening because we're part of an ecology, or a non-ecology really, where we power this loop. We send authority and resources to other points on the loop. And then the loop doesn't really close because it's supposed to close with increasing fertility, increasing fruitfulness with every cycle. I mean, that's how it would work out in nature. But rather than blaming our corrupt politicians along the way here, it may actually be time to blame ourselves, to say, wait, this paradox where we have agreed to do all the work to power the society and yet be powerless is completely untenable and unsustainable. If we agree to that, then we have ruined ourselves. So maybe it's not necessarily our fault now, it's our opportunity to take back that power. Beginning with things like placemaking and other gestures that bring us together. But this is the idea, not to say, oh no, you must not leave where you live, but to go, oh my God, the entire skill set of the society, every archetype of the village is present in every neighborhood. Like every healer, every kind of person that looks after children, teachers, builders, people who work with finance, lawyers, doctors, they're all right there. But by law, we all must leave and never work with each other. I think it's amazing that we're so frustrated by developers, and yet we get in the car or we get on the bus and we go work for a developer. Or we'll go to the bank and work as part of the financial institution. Why do we never cohere and become an intentional culture with all the same skill sets that are ruining the world? Why do we never come together locally and have an idea together? I think that that's the ultimate way to avert gentrification, because gentrification is based on the disintegration and disempowerment of the community anyway, and then it comes back on you with this sort of violent impact. So maybe this is, it's about so much more than just reducing your carbon by reducing your distances that you travel. It's that at the end of the day, you haven't just made money, you've made way more friends, the streets become way more safe, everyone feels way more powerful and secure, and there's all this creative expression. You haven't just grown some apples, like you've become more sort of strong internally with more confidence and a healthier person. So this is what we've been talking about, and this is what we've been doing in Portland, to say, oh, that was supposed to be a place. Maybe it can once again become a place. So this is what we've been doing. And as many of you know, as Mark mentioned, we started off doing this illegally, and it was very quickly legalized because we were addressing goals and objectives. And this is just the same way it would work in Santa Barbara, like all these unmet goals and objectives that every single neighborhood has for engaging youth, building places to talk, becoming more sustainable, more walkable, livable, talkable, all those same goals. So we held up those goals to the city council and they're like, holy cow, this is amazing. Like, you've done all these things, and they surveyed the neighborhood, and 90% of the people said they felt safer and there was less crime. 90% said that traffic speed had slowed as a result of what we had done. So yeah, of course, kids will be running in the space, but they're not running out there when cars are around. You're closing the space, or cars are just simply knowing that there's a place where something special is happening, so they behave differently. And of course, there's this intergenerational mentorship that happens. The Department of Transportation that opposed this initially is now transformed. They're like, oh my gosh, bees are in trouble? Well, let's get a bunch of kids out in the street to build raised planters so we can constrict intersection openings while we plant some habitat out there for mason bees. Like, I mean, how far can we go? I think that's just getting started. They're like, oh no, budgets are low. How will we do this? Unleash the children, you know? Okay, so this diagram here then is taken to scale of the city. a network that brings the whole city together. And that's what the Village Building Convergence is doing in Portland with more than 400 activated communities all across the city. And then this, frankly, is the diagram for the world. And it's not like our evil master plan. It's actually an awesome, super beneficial, dorky master plan called the Sacred Napkin of World Peace of City Repair. That day when we were sitting around, when our slacktivism had ended, we came up with this napkin and we're like, oh my God, we're part of this whole system of the world. It's like a forest ecology. Everything is a node. All of these, imposed city-state systems on top of the fabric of indigenous peoples. Well, here we are in Portland, Oregon. Maybe if we just continue to focus relentlessly and joyously on where we are as part of this incredible left coast that could all rise up together, we will inspire systemic change through the entire network of the planet through the transmission of stories, which after all are the most powerful things in the world. Like people will just be like, whoa, do I ever feel motivated now? So that was the plan, and that's what we've been working on the whole time. Now just coming back from Japan, the principles are basically the same. They are as isolated as we are, maybe even more in some ways. So they sat down together and they're talking about their environment, they're sharing ideas about what they love, they're talking about the issues that affect them, and then every issue that they identify, they immediately go to an opportunity, and they start to design together. And then this is what it looks like an entirely reinvented neighborhood, and they're like, oh yeah, let's go now. So, okay, this is not impossible stuff. This is the stuff that, again, we travel to go see elsewhere, where people live and work in the same space and they build community just by being outside and walking around. This is really, the patterns of permaculture are everywhere in here, where zonation is happening and people are overlapping. This whole culture of relational networks and, sort of being part of a greater whole is playing out in a social way and in a physical way all around you when you're there. But the idea is, our interior world needs to come out and be expressed. What's happening now is that we live within the plans that are designed and funded by professional specialists who may not even have anything to do with where you live. They may not know what your needs are. And in most cases these days, you're designing whole landscapes before anybody even arrives. So, what if you design it so that there's no place for people to even sit? They won't talk. You're actually having people design landscapes for other people whose needs they don't understand. So this interior world needs to play out as a network of relational environments and empowered cultures. And in that case, then, when it's actually happening, you rediscover that the village isn't the stuff. And this is the big revelation for Americans. Oh no, it's not the stuff? You mean it's us? We're the village? The stuff changes? For the snail, what it's about is the snail, not the shell? The bird matters more than the nest? This is our great revelation. When we hold hands and we look each other in the eye, boom, the village exists once again. So here's my favorite little metaphor, the revolt of the pawns. Some of you know how this game works. Old-fashioned chess is like this. You divide people up by their superficial differences. You have darker ones over here, lighter ones over here. But I like to start off realizing that, of course, there would be a community organizer in there somewhere, or a permaculturist. So what happens is the game starts off, and during, it plays out, but during the night, before the next game, the community organizer pawns come out to middle, and they start off by saying, oh my God, I'm so sorry about what happened in that last game. We came out, we attacked each other, and we killed each other. We didn't even know each other's names. And the other one's like, I'm so sorry too. How could this be happening? Well, we're sort of propelled or impelled by these crazy, tall, oppressive ones with funny hats behind us. So they start to talk, and fortunately they manage to get into small groups with facilitators. And they're sitting there talking about their experiences and their oppressive childhoods, and they're all crying. They're like, oh my God, I had no idea you were going through this. Everyone was going through this. We were totally isolated and we weren't talking. So they go to the back row to confront their oppressors. They get pissed off, the tall oppressive ones are like, who, us? We aren't taking more than our share. What are you talking about? So the pawns get mad. But instead of doing that in this social revolution, it's been looking way more like this, where people are trying to figure out how they can contribute and how they can help. Maybe the hour is late. Maybe everyone is somehow just a little bit more ready than you might think. And meanwhile, on the other chessboards, the pawns have heard what is going on. They are thinking to themselves, the time has come. The word goes out to all the other chessboards across the land, in all the other nations of the world. Meanwhile, back at the first place, they are partying hard. They're like, let's get some furniture around here. We got a dining table and a TV and a rocket stove over here. They got some hot tubs down here in the corner, and they've been planting some great perennial gardens, and they grew 3 Asian pears and a squash, and they're having a harvest festival. And this is all we're talking about. Tonight and tomorrow during the workshop, we're talking about re-villaging what we assume is inflexible and unresponsive through our own self-empowerment. And when we talk about world peace, nobody really knows what that's going to look like, but when we were playing this game, it's like, let's just mock it up right now. It would be fertile, it would be vegetated, we'd be talking. We wouldn't feel anxious and racked with despair. Like, pretty much it would look like an imperfect group of people who rock, Like Portland, freaking Oregon, getting married in the streets on the east side. This is what it looks like, a little traffic calming right now. Where John and Lynn are being married by their neighbors and surrounded by friends and family and neighbors from blocks and blocks around. This is what we did as a whole city. I mean, all we did as a whole city was act like those chess players there. Like, the mayor said, after a decade of trying to create our public square, the mayor finally said the dumbest thing possible, which was like, I can't let that happen. I can't let that public square happen, because if I do, you'll gather. And we're like, that's a great idea, Mayor. And he's like, oh, and he said you'll have a revolution. And we're like, that's an even better idea. So we came out onto the rooftop of this 2-story parking garage that we were trying to tear down to put in the public square, and the mayor shows up in his Mustang, gets out and he's yelling at everyone over here, and meanwhile we painted his car while he wasn't looking. And then we threw him out of office completely. He was so gone from the city. And then we built our public square, we took over the political culture, and we have been part of a value-driven, intentional, urban society since that time. Totally not perfect. I'm going on about this because the little book post that you put in or the little garden that you install with children all adds up to stories that are transmitted that inspire other people. So this is why in Portland, Oregon, we have the most bike commuters and the most bike lane miles by far, increasing every year, while ridership in cars is diminishing measurably every year. Our transportation officials are doing this themselves. They're like going out to talk to children about how they would modify our little street marking graphics here and add things like slugs, to make it fun. Yeah, we've got the most green buildings of all cities in the USA because of this culture of excitement and sort of shared creativity. More than 50 farmers markets all across the city. We've met and exceeded the Kyoto targets for carbon reduction. And on and on and on. The only city in the USA to do that. And we just built the United States' first car-free bridge with all other forms of transportation accommodated by an automobile. Artistic culture, food culture is absolutely through the roof. I think we're exceeding the Renaissance. I'm totally serious. You should see what's happening in the creative culture of this city and the music culture as well. We have the shortest distance between where food is grown and where people eat it in the USA. Oh boy. We also celebrate this every year with the greatest, biggest naked bike ride in the world, where we set a new world record standing now at 25,000 people. And when we had just done it, we had like 300 naked Portlanders out, and then London's like, aha, we'll crush you, and there's like 700 naked people in London. And then the bike ride was happening again. We thought, oh no, can we beat London? Can we get 700 naked Portlanders together? Pulling them out of the shower if we have to. And that night we had 3,500 people, and it was the most glorious thing. Like, the bike riders were in all the lanes, going in all directions, all moving like a tide across the city. The next day, all these big businesses were mad at the mayor. They're like, you can't do this, they're naked, this is terrible. And the mayor said, dudes, the hotels are full. People have come from everywhere to see this. The restaurants are full. The economy is thriving. Get a life. And the police are loving it, and these naked people go down to the waterfront and they dance naked all night long with the police down there dancing too. Okay, and then, for a long time we were like Beer City, USA, and then Asheville, North Carolina took the crown. Beer City, haha, we have it. So then we became freaking Beer City of the planet. I don't know who figured that out, but now that's what's happening. Like, Beervana is what Portland is known as, more than Stumptown. So come there. You won't even believe it. Like, my favorite place has 20 new beers every week. What? The things that they're combining, they're evil scientists making these crazy beer concoctions. So I'm going on about this because this isn't an isolated story. This is what's going to happen to us all. Even if somehow the planet goes down and a meteorite takes us out someday, before we get there, we will have been thriving for so long. I'm saying this because we're part of a larger ecology, and what's happening in this place is happening in a lot of places in various measures up and down the West Coast for sure. Here's our urban growth boundary, whereas 3 counties we agreed to hold the line as much as we can and only grow incrementally and try to preserve farmland and forest, concentrate our density, link it all together with mass transit systems. This is a really awesome but completely imperfect diagram, because we ultimately have to confront the fact that we're within a biosphere that has limited carrying capacity, and the economy must somehow be re-engineered and reimagined. But for now, this is what we have, which is amazing. Bringing it down to the community level, the principle here is that, if you're the tree of life of humanity, you can't treat the tree like it's some kind of tulip in a vase where you just cut off the stem and stick it in water and expect it to thrive. If you cut off the grassroots empowerment of any culture, the great tree of your society will die. And so the idea of city repair is regenerate the roots in order to heal the whole system. Don't be worrying about all the other things everywhere else in the network as much as you are where you live. And the root system will basically pump, just like an actual root pumps, nutrients and minerals and moisture into the body of the tree upwards as the tree is bringing solar energy downward and infusing the planet with energy. The same way it works in a human culture. We need to be pumping energy and inspiration and ideas and growing true leadership within our communities in order to affect the whole system. So for us, we had a couple of little girls in this neighborhood get run over by a car, and it was just enough. Why is there no playground for little kids to play without crossing busy streets that are barely even marked in this community? This was how City Repair got started 20 years ago. So here's a bunch of adults talking about it, and they have a model of a street intersection with some toys to basically use to mock up the dynamics of a street. And then we were armed with these goals and objectives that are never met in local communities. And we said, we're going to meet all of these, but how are we going to do it? So at the end of the session, we were almost ready to give up because nobody could think outside of the box except this 13-year-old young woman who said, wait, don't give up. I've done a chart of what everyone does for a living around a street intersection that we could transform into a public square. And she gave this chart to the adults and she said, look at how you could work together, connect the dots. So they're like, oh my God, there's a doctor and everyone gets sick. There's a chef, we all like to eat. Hey, there's a builder who could work with a landscaper, who could work with a carpenter, who could work with an architect. So 5 minutes later, it's completely dense with all of these lines that connect everyone. And we realized, everybody's here. Everybody that we need is right here. So this one woman gets up before the meeting's even over and she's like, I can't even stand it anymore. I'm going to go down to the intersection right now, because she had a house on the corner. And she built what she called the world's first 24-hour self-service chalk station. When the rest of us came out of the meeting, public space was already being taken over by wild villagers. But this is what we did. We called transportation. We said, hey, we got this idea. We think we could slow traffic and raise livability and engage children. And they're like, that's impossible. That can't be done. That's never happened before. And we it's happened all over the planet, except in the grid. Let us try it out. And they said, no way, besides that's public space, so nobody can use it. We're like, and we're like, have you ever heard of the word dystopia? God, we must be in one. And they're like, oh, you're so frustrating. Why don't you go home? And we're like, we are home. There's nowhere else to go. So we decided to do it anyway, and we did it. And we were being criminals when we did this, but it was legalized swiftly after that, unanimously by the city council, because they said, after all, we do have the lowest number of outdoor gathering places of all first world nations, the United States, and the highest rates of violence connected to our isolation. So this retrofit strategy at last restores a field of creative participation to the communities where people live. The communities must be broken if there is no such place. So now we will enact the first and only place-based form of self-governance in the United States, where people who live right here will have control over and can program the space into the future. Boom, national innovation. Okay, but there we were being criminals, but I swear, if that's what you must do in order to be a villager at last, then you have to do it, which is why we're here with you tonight. The world's first 24-hour solar-powered self-service tea station here on the southwest corner. And this, according to articles that have been written, it was the first little free library in the world as well, which has replicated something like 30,000 times now. And the story of that little thing was 2 little foster kids who were totally neglected were taught how to use hammers and drive nails in the genesis of the first library. There's so many other things that they were taught, but then it was installed, and I remember standing back and just being like, this thing is going to go somewhere. A small local action that can replicate endlessly is the kind of stuff that will change the world. So, years later, as we're doing this, now we stand back and we watch these gigantic combined birthday parties happening in the streets, learning a little bit about American history. It's like, wait, this is what we did before cars existed. Giant combined, this was the most important function of streets, not just moving donkeys around with carts. Like, getting kids together out into a civic space to have shared birthday parties was a way to cultivate a sense of civic belonging in all the kids. So now we're taking all the birthday parties out from the backyards and living rooms where they really don't belong and putting them out there in the streets. And that's where the arrow shooting party happens. That's where the puppet show happens. That's where the piñata party happens. When they knock the contents in the streets and the kids are running around madly to pick up the contents, you're actually building future generations of leadership at the same time. And then they have the annual pagans versus the Romans water balloon war, of course. And then the birthday cake of world peace here. This is their favorite intersection, and they've actually made a model of it out of their cake. They get to actually eat their cake too. All these friends that happen, there's so many outcomes. It's not just the paint, it's not the projects on the corners, it's the fact that suddenly you know where the old ladies are that need help, you know where the people are who need childcare, and you know where the teenagers are who can have a little job with them, you know where the people who are who know about horticulture and permaculture who can help the people who have an interest in it. And the effects go deeply into the blocks around you. In fact, then you have a workshop to look at where this all can go. And this workshop was called What Would World Peace Look Like? And at the end of an afternoon, and if you haven't done this in your neighborhood, no wonder you're not having world peace yet. You need to have an afternoon-long workshop to talk about what you could do, small-scale interventions on each corner, little trellises, sundials, maybe a bird bath, just to get started. And then maybe combine garage sales every spring to raise a little money for your projects where people are selling old things, maybe they're making new things, maybe they're massaging each other's feet, maybe they're having lunch together. And then the projects on the corners grow. The tea station becomes a flower stand managed by teenagers who have a little job there, but they're managing this as a small commercial intervention that's all place-based, so it serves the real needs of the community. And at the end of the workshop, this is what we call world peace, people out walking, talking, interacting, totally having power in our own environment. Our carbon footprints have utterly diminished, and we're actually in charge of our own destiny. Boom. Okay, so then we noticed that the major daily media had not told the rest of Portland that it was now legal to transform as many street intersections as you want. In fact, 17,000 of them are available for us to work on. And 5,000 street miles now. We can now transform all the streets in between the intersections as of 3 months ago. So we decided to create this called the Tea Horse, to send this all around the city to basically create placemaking interventions, where people in parks or block parties or parking lots would be waiting for us to come, and then the Tea Horse would show up, this ephemeral, nomadic placemaker. It would set up, all these people would share tea and dessert and play music into the night, rock out. And then all the locations where the Tea Horse had gone were linked up into an enormous circle of people holding hands around the city. And this was a way to say, we're all one part of one big city that, we all identify with, we'll stand our ground. So part of this was to respond to Noam Chomsky, who was saying, why don't we ever get together by the thousands to actually do something constructive? Why are we only protesting against what we don't like? Let's create what we do want. So he said, all right, Noam, we'll do a totally non-commercial event where people will just stand and connect. The community radio station will be running, having bicycle messengers run around with telephones all around the route, interviewing everyone. And everyone around the route will be hearing the community radio station and all these people, thousands of them, talking as the circle is assembling. That'll be cool. Everyone will feel like they're part of something big, but the real point of all of it was for every little kid on the route to look to the left or right and see people treating each other with dignity and respect by the thousands. That's about planting a different kind of seed in our society against the power of the media and TVs and movies. Okay, so that's cool stuff. That's what city repair came out of, and I think that's something that Lucidity could do with like the flick of a pinky, you know, that kind of like festival atmosphere. And in speaking of festival, I mean, once you get that many people together, you want to have a party. So we did. We flooded the downtown with people wearing animal costumes by the thousands on Earth Day, and then we occupied the public square with an enormous Earth Day event, which now moves around the city to a different community every year. Transforming the blocks around the intersections where this is happening. People have been talking about revillaging, like, oh my gosh, maybe we're not just an arbitrary square. Maybe we can have gateways that welcome people into the perimeter of the village. Simple gestures like this, or more grand ones with edible vines. And then instead of just walking long, straight, flat lines and turning 90 degrees for your whole life reality, instead make pathways that are journeys once again, that transgress over the parking or over the property lines that are no longer as powerful in your imagination to separate you. And during this discussion, where we actually built a model of our block, we just mowed down fences and put in pathways because we couldn't even stand it anymore. Then we started to embellish our porches and make the existing fabric of places into an even more beautiful experience to share with each other. And then we came up with a program of all the different kinds of things we would like to have on our block. And this was the question: are we just here to pay a ticket to somebody else's reality, always just paying a ticket to go somewhere to enjoy ourselves? Or will we be generators of our own experience as place-based people once again? So we built the most high-performance natural building at the center of the block as a community gathering place for everyone to share, broke down fences, made pathways, installed open gathering places, repurposed old houses and turned them into urban permaculture schools like the Planet Repair Institute here. Oh, and this was done illegally using straw clay. And at this point, the relationship with the city is so great that we're like, oh, sorry, we did it again. They're like, oh, that's okay, because we're Portland, and we'll totally retroactively legalize it. In fact, now they basically said, all right, permaculturists and natural builders, you can have the cookie jar now. They created the Alternative Technology Advisory Committee, and they're like, okay, instead of retroactively legalizing everything, just put it into a proposal, give it to the committee, they'll legalize it, and it'll be put into the code from now on. This is a community sauna on the same block. Here's a soup, like you've heard of tiny houses. This is a teeny house. This is 56 square feet, and Jane said, I'll only move onto the block if I have a 56 square foot house. So this is Jane's teeny house. Okay, urban agriculture all around the block. Annual gardens, food forests, little orchards all around the block, green roofs. This is the chicken palace. Almost everyone in Portland has a chicken now. Chicken friend, little chicken safety dog thing or whatever with a little helper. Anyway, these chickens live in the chicken palace, which of course is in the shape of an egg. We took a clue from Christopher Alexander, who's always talking about human patterns. We thought chickens must have a pattern language too, after all. Wouldn't they want to come home at the end of the day to a big egg with a chicken beak-shaped front porch roof, with a little weather vane with people on top instead of chickens. And then we created a water system diagram for knitting everyone together on the block, and the first initiatives are like constructed wetlands above the ground that handles kitchen water, and then water that flows into a pond where you're growing fish, and then the pond overflows to a banana plant, and then a washer unleashes its water out to tree roots. These domestic retrofits, which are so easy and low cost to do, would actually probably reduce your own domestic demand in California by like 50% in a day. And I know that sounds outrageous, but just imagine instead of washing dishwater and then sending it down the drain, capturing it in a basin and just carrying it outside to feed a perennial or your annual garden, or maybe disconnecting the elbow underneath your bathroom sink to capture that water and then use that to flush your toilet. These sort of simple gestures that cost nothing can cut your water budget dramatically. Here's the cat palace. This is a solar-powered cat palace on the same block. This is a little solar skyscraper for cats. And on this level, there's actually a solar-powered aquarium room where the cats go in and just sit there watching fish all day while they roll around on catnip, feeling unmotivated. So this whole challenge on, oh no, climate change, it's actually every single challenge, like we say in permaculture, is an opportunity. Oh, there's the challenge. Awesome, because you flip it over and it's like, here's the luminous opportunity of the floating garden planet, right there. To live in a way that like honors our people and sets up future generations to thrive. So this is what it might look like. after about 10 months of sharing with each other and not doing the stuff that destroys the world. Okay, very helpful. The city council has legalized these retrofits of urban environments all across the city for free. You can now put in community bike parking shelters, solar-powered, pre-approved solar-powered cob kiosks, community composting in the streets legalized, any kind of bench that you want to build, and on and on and on. In fact, they've just passed, and here's the cumulative effect. That's the block I just showed you. Here's the impact on the blocks around this intersection we started with. They just passed a new law that allows every single block in the city to install at least one feature without even telling the city that you've done it. And it's given a permit automatically and insured. They talk, this principle in permaculture about working with succession isn't just about forest ecologies. It actually applies to us. Start off not knowing what you're doing, but just start. Like once you're getting going and you're working with other people, you build a little trust. Things become less formal and a lot more flexible. People start to understand each other better, and you've built a lot of momentum. And your social structures will become increasingly networked and flexible. So these little free libraries and kiosks are going on all around the city for free. Retrofits of agricultural projects can happen on a very big scale, like in our neighborhood. And then they start to replicate like crazy. This is in the Sunnyside neighborhood where they said, let's just take the logo, the symbol of the neighborhood, the sunflower, and put it down in the streets. Now the Department of Transportation says, we have never seen anything build community like this. And it's really like, duh. Human beings need a sense of place, not just a sense, they need a gathering place at every single scale of community, from the neighborhood all the way through every single scale of municipality, all the way to the Capitol Rotunda. That's what a democracy would look like. And every one of them will honor the stories and the traditions of their place, like this one, where their story is that they build turbines and propellers and wheels, and so they're honoring that. Like standing on common ground. In the USA, we are so malleable and divisible because we never stand on common ground, literally, and we don't think of it figuratively or metaphorically, but here they are at last. And how does this help to put things into perspective? How does it help to actually listen to kids? Like the adults thought, okay, we've worked out this awesome idea. It's going to be square and brown, like adults will do. And then the kids come running in. This is in my neighborhood. And the kids are like, oh, we figured out what we should paint on the intersection this year. Wouldn't dinosaurs be mad if they realized the cars were burning fossil fuels? Because that's the bodies of dinosaurs. Wouldn't a Tyrannosaurus Rex, therefore, come out of a manhole cover and eat cars with Superman helping? Of course. And the adults are like, why didn't we think of that? This is what's legal. And this is why, you will have people, so-called NIMBY people, who will look at this and be like, oh no, what about property values? Yeah, what about property values when something never gets vandalized? And where the American Journal of Public Health publishes studies that say that people are getting physically and mentally healthier as a result of doing this. And everybody thinks that crime has reduced and traffic has slowed because you've come together and fused your creativity into something that affects behavior and perception all around the city. In this case, this was inevitable, a huge rainbow dragon. It had to happen at some point. A giant freaking whatever. I don't even know what this is, some kind of flower. This is a delegation from the state government, including the governor, coming on a bike ride to do a tour of these things. So we're affecting consciousness, not just in the city, where the city is helping all these other cities. We're affecting the state. President Obama has allocated millions of dollars for using this as a technique for youth gang violence prevention, now engaging kids with the first test projects in Portland to go to the sites where they have shot their friends, bringing the gangs together to actually create together memorials to the people that have been killed. And then, they didn't just paint intersections. They built 150 little free libraries to honor the 150th anniversary of our library system in Portland, Oregon. So all around the city. Activated cultures, accelerating the process of change for the whole city through excitement, exuberance. Lots and lots of projects like this, little sort of small-scale gathering places made of, cob or straw clay or straw bale or earth bag, or this is an endless variety, endless menu of things that you can work with that are low embodied energy, absolutely non-toxic stuff that kids can work with without hurting themselves. We've been applying this at a scale with homeless people, and it's like, of course, true grassroots democracy applied by people upon themselves will heal anyone. So this is an aerial drawing of the actual finished village in Portland, which is the nation's leading tiny house-based homeless village. It's called Dignity Village, and it has replicated and improved like 5 times across the country. In San Luis Obispo, they're trying to create another version called Hope's Village. Now this has proven to be such an outstanding solution that costs 22 times less per person than a government-run shelter, and it's way more successful at healing people. That now we're talking about building them at larger urban scales. This is a giant passive solar barn with multiple levels for homeless people to create their own living environments within. I'm actually showing you a secret project that's being developed for the mayor of Portland that he hasn't even been releasing to the public in Portland yet. So Portlanders don't even know, but I'm showing you because you're a little bit of a distance away from Portland. There is the internet, of course. And then this is a bigger, more sort of super urban one, more dense, but both of these are economically generative, self-supporting with retail levels and office levels above that, and then the homeless population on top of that, and then also having jobs in the building. And then this is another one in which the economy of the whole building creates economic self-support systems for homeless villagers that have at least 3 levels within the building and an outdoor platform for gardening. And this is what the developers and the mayor are working on creating in Portland. And there's going to be 20 of these initiatives. Because homeless people are coming from all over the continent to the West Coast, as you may have already seen. And there's quite a few of them in Portland. This is an image of the cumulative impact of more than 400 community organized initiatives in Portland, and I'm only representing the stuff we're connected to. It's happening all over the place with so many other communities that have been activated and nonprofits involved. Minneapolis, St. Paul has almost as many as Portland. In fact, they're threatening our bike record, but it keeps getting too cold for them to actually complete the ride. This is Cincinnati, Ohio, the biggest one in the whole country. And I'm like, Cincinnati, Ohio, okay. We're a lot farther along than we thought. And here's Iowa. I don't know how many times this has happened in Iowa now, but if it's happening there, it can happen anywhere. But just to close things down, every little girl, every little boy, as soon as they can even use their hands, starts to be a placemaker. And if we had a just society characterized by freedom, we would see their proclivity for doing this just mature into expressions of beautiful, sustainable culture. But that isn't what happens. They get retrained and they become people who think that they can't do things. But it is our birthright, and it is our very nature to come out of our mothers ready to make place. And place is a fusion of all the things that otherwise are separated when people are conquered. So we're natural communicators, and we're natural collectors of patterns and images and stories that we fuse together in new iterations through our whole lives. So what we're talking about in Santa Barbara, what we've been doing in Portland, Oregon, this is not new, this is ancient, and it's inherent. It's absolutely our right, and everything depends upon it. So on behalf of City Repair in Portland, thanks for coming tonight.
All right, thank you so much, Mark. Another inspiring presentation.